Hi everyone. Let's look at a couple of problems from last week's quiz. So here is one of the loop tracing questions. You probably had a different version, but this will highlight some of the same key ideas. So we'll start going through this code, stop at the breakpoint. So here we have the first print statement, and you can see on the right the values in the list are 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so as I step through that, val will be 1, and then we check the sum. The sum is not less than 0, so we keep going. Val is 2, so we'll add 2 to the sum, and again add 3 to the sum, add 4 to the sum. So 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 is 10. You can see that up in the upper right that says 10, and that will also get returned and printed out. And then when we take the second problem, we have -1, -2, -3, and -4. So again, we'll start the loop. Val will be -1 the first time through. We will add that to sum. So now our sum is 0 plus -1 is -1. Well, that is less than 0. So this if statement evaluates to true. And now we're at the return statement. And we're going to return that sum. So we can see here sum is currently -1. That is what will be returned, and that is the answer to the second problem. Again, the key thing to remember here is that a return statement is the last statement a function executes. When you get to the return statement, you're done, and you give that final answer. So let's move on and look at the third problem. So the third problem, we have a mix of positive and negative numbers, 5, -3, 6, and -1. So we'll go through the loop. First time through, val is 5, the first value on the list. We'll add that to the sum. That makes our sum 5, which is not less than 0. So we'll go around, grab that second value. This time the value is -3. So we'll add -3 to that running total. So 5 plus -3 is 2. 2 is not less than 0, so we keep going. Notice that the if statement looks at the sum, not the value, and the sum is still positive. So we move on to the next element in the list. So we have value is 6. We can add 6 to 2 to get 8, still positive. Now the val is -1. 8 plus -1 is 7. That's still positive, so we make it through the loop, return that 7 as our final answer. All right, again, we have a mix of positive and negative numbers. We start with 5 again, so that sum is 5, not less than 0. Now, val the second time through is -7. 5 plus -7 is -2, and here the sum is less than 0. -2 is less than 0, so we're done. We're at a return statement. We're going to return that sum of -2, and we won't look at the rest of the values in the list because we hit a return statement. And the last one is the empty list. So here we start the function, set sum equal to 0. We're at the for loop, for val in list. The list is empty. There's nothing on the list. So what that means is none of the indented code runs. The body of the loop, the indented code, runs 0 times. So the next line is line 7, the return sum. And what sum? Sum is equal to 0. So this does seem to be a point of confusion. Having an empty list does not produce none as a return value. What produces none as a return value is when you leave a function without ever running a return statement. In this case, we did run a return statement. The last line of the function is return sum. So whether there's elements in the list or not doesn't matter. We have a value to return. And in this case, that value would be the initial value of sum there on line 2. So as a point of comparison, let's say I were to remove line 7, if I were to remove that return after the loop. Now if I were to run this code, you can see that some of those problems would return none. Those problems where the for loop completes would return none because after the for loop, there are no more lines of code, so the function exits without a return value. Thus, the return value is by default none. And in the case of the second and third problems here, we see that there is actually a non-none return value because the sum falls below 0 in these two cases. So we end up running the return statement that's inside the if statement. So for those of you who are still working on this learning objective, the tracing the loops, review the difference between a none and actually returning a value, and it is not the empty list. And one way to review that is to go ahead and take some of these problems and change them up a bit. There's nothing particularly magic in the code I'm writing, so you can take the code I'm writing, move the indentations around, delete some lines, and you have a different problem, and those are good things for practice. So don't hesitate to do that, and of course don't hesitate to stop by my office if you put together a problem and you don't understand why it's behaving the way it is. All right, now let's look at the problem where we're writing if statements. In particular, a group of if-else-if blocks. So familiar theme here, right? We're writing some code to give out some discounts depending on some different rules here. Now at a first pass, the rules are pretty simple. Seniors get one discount, students get another, and so on. But there's a couple of caveats here, right? You'll see down in the second paragraph that on Fridays, we only give 10% for your birthday. And however you calculate your discounts, they can't ever go above 30%. So how might we attack that? Well, one of the things we learned earlier in the semester is go for the most restrictive rule first. And that could work here. But we can take a looser approach. We can start by just going down the list and then going back and making some adjustments. That'll work here as well. So the first rule is seniors get 15% off. So we'll start with a discount of 0, and then we're going to check to see if we have a senior. So if we have a senior, they get a 15% discount, and students get 10% off. So we'll check to see if we have a student. Sorry, that is student. So if we have a student, that's another 10%. Everybody gets 5% off on Tuesday. So if it's Tuesday, we'll add another 5%. And it says everybody gets 20% off on his birthday. And thus far, these 4 conditions are all separate. They don't affect each other, so I have 4 separate if statements. And then we get down to the extra rules here. So it says on Friday, the birthday discount is only 10%. So this rule right here we need to modify. And there's a few ways of doing it. So I'm going to go with an iterative approach where I'm going to do something that doesn't quite work and we'll fix it. So we can just go with this rule directly. We can say if it's your birthday and it's Friday, then the discount is 10%. Now, this doesn't work because now I've just given you 30% for your birthday on Friday. So we have to go back and rethink this. Now, here's where we can use that rule of thumb that says check the more restrictive condition first. Right? The more restrictive condition is it's your birthday and it's Friday. So if we put that first, then we can use the else if. So If it's your birthday and it's Friday, you'll get a 10% discount. If that's not the case, if both of these aren't true, then we'll check to see if it's your birthday and we'll give you 20%. And so by checking the more restrictive condition first, this will work out just fine. Notice the else if here is key. Also notice that this wouldn't work in the other order because then it would always give you 20% on your birthday and it would never check the Friday condition. Okay. And then we have one more rule. The maximum discount is 30%. So what that means is if your discount is somehow greater than 30%, right? If it's your birthday on a Wednesday and you're a student and you're a senior and you've stacked up all these discounts and the owner's afraid he's going to lose some money, then you'll say, well, wait, we can't go above 30%. So we'll just reset that discount to 30%. And then when we're done, we'll return the discount. So there is one way of approaching this. There's probably, I think I saw at least 4 different approaches to this problem that were all very good and not any better than any others. But this is how I would think through a problem like this. All right, and finally, for a little bit of extra practice, let's look at another version of this problem. So at first glance, this looks like the same problem, but the rules are just a little bit different. But again, we can tackle the problem the same way. We can start out by these conditions, these 4 conditions, which in general, you can stack up those discounts, and then we can come back and make some adjustments to account for the rules. So again, just like before, if your age is over 65, we'll start you out with a 15% discount. Actually, I forgot, we should probably initialize that discount to 0. And then if you're a student, we'll give you 10% off. And if it's Tuesday, there's another 5%. And finally, if it's your birthday, we'll give you a whopping 50% off. All right, now we've got the extra rules down here and we'll have to change things. So first it says the only discount given on Friday is for birthdays. All right, so what that means is you can get this on your birthday, but you can't get any of this on your birthday. So let's see, what's the quickest change we can make to account for that? Let's see. None of what's highlighted applies on Friday, so we could just surround it in another if statement. If it's not Friday, then we can check all of this. And then down here for it being a birthday, doesn't matter what day it is. If it's your birthday, you get 50% off. And then here it says you can't get both the senior discount and the student discount. All right, so that means these two are mutually exclusive. You can't get both. And so when you can't get both, that's a classic use of an else if. So this should work, although I didn't see anybody do it this way. All right, but hopefully you see how I kind of laid out the code straightforward and was able to go back and make some changes. Yeah, I know that's a little bit harder to do with pencil and paper, but if it helps with your thought process. But let me back up, right? Because I didn't see too many students write things this way, let's back up and look at another way of doing it. So here we're back to more or less where we started, except I'll leave that else if in there because that is the way we handle rule number 2 here. So let's see, the only discount given on Fridays is for birthdays. So here's more of what I saw many students write. And they said, oh, okay, so if it's your birthday and it's Friday, let's see, if it's your birthday and it's Friday, then the only discount you can get is 50% off. So we'll just return 50% right here and be done. There's no reason to check for anything else. Yep, that works. But if you're going to take that approach, you do need to remember to check to see that it's your birthday down here as well. I did have a number of students give you that 50% off on Friday, but forget that you could get that 50% also on other days of the week. So here's another approach, equally as good as the one I just showed. All right, so hopefully that gives you something else to practice with and helps you work through any struggles you're having writing those if statements. And as I said before, I'm here to help. And then we also, as I mentioned last week, we have the Student Success Center in Allendale and the Python Wave and many other options to get help. So learning to code is a skill. It takes lots of practice and different students need different types of practice. So be sure to take advantage of that wide variety of help that's there and find the one that helps you most.